The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Well, crap. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retro Bits. In today's episode, the Commodore SX-64. Now, we've already done a first look at this machine, so I'll link to that video in the description and up there in case you haven't seen it already. This particular system came to me by way of the Toronto Estate auction lot, which is a really fun road trip, and if you haven't seen that, I'll link to it as well. Now, you may notice we're doing something a little different today. I'm trying a more informal, less scripted approach, so we're going to see how that goes. Anyway, back to the SX-64. The keyboards on these machines are a common failure point, so let's dive right in. So the first thing I want to do is test every key on the keyboard and then mark off the ones that don't work on this matrix so we can get an idea of what we're dealing with. So here are the results, and it's not looking particularly good. It looks like about half of the keys either don't work or don't work reliably. What's interesting though is there's not a single row or column that is completely failed, so the cable itself is probably fine and the CIA chip inside the computer itself is probably fine. And what we're dealing with is a bad keyboard membrane. So let's tear open the keyboard and see what's inside. In order to open up the keyboard, you need to remove this top bezel. It's very easy to remove, but be careful because it is fragile. You don't want to break it because there's no replacements for this part. Now, I'll be following a guide that was written by Ray Carlson, who's a legend in the Commodore community. I'll link to it in the description, but in this guide, Ray talks about exactly how to dismantle the keyboard and what to look out for in terms of repairing it. The first thing we want to do is get in here on the side, either with your fingernail, a coin, or I'm going to be using this plastic car stereo removal tool. Here at the F1 and at the arrow key, you just want to slide your tool, your coin, or your fingernail and gently pry up. And then you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side here. Just get in there, pry it up, and that will pop the little catches here, 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 and it'll come right off. But you can see that it's relatively thin and you don't want to damage this part. So just be gentle and be careful. So now we get our first look at the keyboard here. And I'm going to retrobright that space bar. That is just a mess compared to all the other keys. Clearly made from a different plastic. Has yellowed where the other ones have not. Oh, that is interesting. Let me get you zoomed in on this. That is... right off the bat, I can see something that's wrong. Yeah, do you see that right here? This little piece of metal should be screwed in, but there aren't any screws. This little piece of metal here holds down the membrane to the circuit board and actually is what causes the connection to occur between the membrane, the traces on the membrane, and the cable that connects to the PC. And without this bolted in place, there's not going to be enough tension on those contacts. So right there is the first problem. But setting that aside for the moment, let's keep going. There are 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4 that need to come out. This one will have to come out later. It grounds the membrane to the rest of the circuit, but we won't need to remove that for a minute. So let's just take out these 4. And with that, the keyboard itself should come out just like that. And we've got this cable. Let me turn that around for you. We're going to have to remove the cable so that it's bolted to the housing. Let's get in there. Oh, there's a screw, just showed up. There's one of the screws that's missing right there. Yeah, so that's interesting. I checked and there is no second screw anywhere to be found. It's not falling out of the keyboard. It's not held in the chassis, so it may just be gone. We're going to need to find a replacement for that if we ever want this to work properly again. But in the meantime, let's continue with the teardown. The next step is to remove all of the keys. Now normally what you'd do is you'd pop off the keycaps one at a time, and that would allow you to remove the circuit board. But in this case, it's actually the opposite. You would need to remove the key switches, but you can leave the keys intact. And the way you remove the key switches is just gently pushing with your fingernails each of these little tabs, and the key should pop right on out. Just like that. And that's all you need to do. But we need to do that quite a number of times. So I'm going to get to it. This is actually kind of fun. They come out so easy. It's actually easier than pulling keycaps off the top. If you've got the right tool, they just pop right out so easily and so quickly. And then you've just got all these keys. Boom. This is actually fun. So it occurs to me that someone else has probably been in here already trying to fix this thing, perhaps the previous owner. There is no way that those screws would have backed out all the way and disappeared on their own. So someone took this apart, didn't put it back together correctly, and or lost the pieces that they needed to put it back together. So my guess is it probably didn't work even beforehand, and they were unable to repair it, and maybe it's not worse than it was before, but clearly they wouldn't have been in here trying to mess with it if it was in good working order to start with. So I think we can repair this. In fact, I am sure of it. So let's just keep pressing on. And there we go. All the keys are off except the space bar. And check this out. I noticed one other thing here. The space bar, I don't know if you can see that, it's not properly reassembled. They didn't get the little metal latch in the right place. So it's sort of loose. So yeah, someone's definitely been in here and they didn't properly restore this to its original working condition. Yep, they didn't do that right. Now the next thing we want to look at are the keys themselves. And I don't suspect these are the problem simply because there's just so many failures. But one thing that we can look at is the spring that's inside of here. If you see, there's a little spring, and that spring needs to be the right length in order to push down and make the right amount of pressure on the keyboard membrane. And so if that spring is exactly flush with the little disc and the surface there, then that's the right amount of length. If it's recessed or too long, it can either not put enough force on the membrane or press too hard on the membrane and the key will always be activated. So I need to go one by one through each of these keys and make sure that the spring is the right length and adjust it if it isn't. So I'm going to do that and we'll be right back. All right, I've examined every single key and they all appear to be well within tolerance, so I don't see any problems with the springs. So the next thing I'm going to do is clean all of these just lightly, and I'm going to retrobright the spacebar because it's just so ugly compared to the rest of the keys. So in order to clean them, I'm just going to wipe them off with a microfiber towel and some Windex glass cleaner, generic, because I don't want to inundate them in water or get soap because the whole spring mechanism is still intact and I don't want all sorts of water getting up in there. And I also don't want to risk losing any of these little springs. They do just pop right out, and if you're not careful, they'll go shooting across the floor and you'll never see them again. So I'm going to be real careful, and I'm just going to do it by hand. And these keys are actually relatively clean. There's, you know, I've seen way worse. They're in pretty good shape. They haven't faded very much, and they're relatively clean. This machine doesn't show a lot of signs of usage. It looks to be in pretty good condition, except for the fact that the screw is missing, the spacebar was improperly installed. So I'm guessing this machine led a pretty easy life, all told. Many of the other machines in this auction lot were in much worse shape in terms of cosmetics, very dirty keyboards. This is probably the cleanest of all the machines. Yeah, you can see they're not very dirty at all. The towel is hardly taking on any color except for some of the blue dye in the glass cleaner. And there we go. Yep, they were very clean. There's hardly any traces of dirt or grime on the towel, just the slightest amount. Not bad. So we'll go with the standard Retrobright process today. I'm reusing some peroxide water, but I'm going to top it up just a little bit, give it a little more effectiveness. And in goes the space bar. Ooh. And there we go. We'll let that sit for a while. All right, now that the keys are dealt with, we can remove the keyboard membrane. And now it's time to remove that grounding screw. And normally, we'd have to remove 2 screws from the back that hold that little metal bar in place, but since that was missing entirely, we don't have to do that. Now, to remove the membrane, it just lifts off. But if you want any hope of reusing it and repairing it, you need to remove it very, very gently so as not to pinch it or to tear it. And it is very fragile. So you're going to want to go very slowly, start at the end, and wherever it binds up on a hole or an LED, you're going to want to try and release it very gently with, I'm using a plastic point, but you know, I've seen people use toothpicks, your fingernail, but just go slowly and go gently and take your time. This can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to do it properly. You do not want to tear it. You do not want to pinch it. Any unusual geometry when you try to put it back may cause the key nearby to not function properly after the fact. It needs to be perfectly flat when it goes back in. So we're just going to take our time. We're going to go slowly. And right here, we can see where the membrane makes contact with the PCB. It's an 8x8 matrix, and we'll look at the matrix a little bit more in a bit, but half of the lines connect to this plane here on the membrane, and half of them connect to the contacts on the PCB itself. And when the circuit is closed, that's what registers a key press. And we'll take a closer look at that in a minute once we get this all apart. This is actually coming off really easily. Sometimes apparently they stick and they tear, they bind up. This is coming right apart. Yeah, 30 seconds and it's coming right out. Just need to help it along a little bit here and there around some of these edges. There's some sharp edges. You really just don't want to tear it. Don't apply excess force. If it comes out this easily, just with light pressure, great. Yep, it bound up a little bit around the LED, but that's about it. And there we go. So let's talk about the keyboard construction a little bit more now. First of all, we have the PCB itself, and we have an 8x8 matrix, which I've alluded to, and here's a graph of what that looks like. We have rows and columns, and if we had a problem where an entire row or an entire column didn't register, we'd know we'd have a problem with a connection, either one of the lines, the cable to the machine itself, or one of these points where the PCB connects to the membrane itself. Now, when I peeled the membrane away, this part stayed behind. This is actually part of the membrane, and it came right off. It wasn't even attached to the membrane, so this part is supposed to be attached here to the membrane and connect these traces to the PCB. And that's how the signal gets from here to there. The keyboard presses on this side between each of these contact points. And between each of the contact points is a little carbon disc. That carbon disc presses down through this rubber sheet that separates the membrane. There's actually a rubber sheet here. You can see the white part. And the carbon disc presses down through the white part of the sheet, creates contact, completes the circuit between the PCB and the membrane, and that closes the switch. Now, what happens over time is that these carbon contacts can wear out, and so they can be either cleaned or repaired. You can use some of the carbon paint or automotive defroster paint sometimes to repair both these contact points and possibly these contacts here. But a lot of people get away with just using a dry Q-tip and cleaning these contact points, and then using some isopropyl alcohol or just a pencil eraser and cleaning off each of the contacts on the PCB. Let me get a closer look at that for you. Now, it may be hard to see, but each of these contacts is a little bit discolored. There looks to be a little bit of surface corrosion or surface oxidation on each of these points. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a little IPA on a Q-tip, and I'm going to clean off each one of these for starters, and that'll help make the circuit less resistive. And that'll be the first step. So I've just got a little isopropyl alcohol on the cotton bud, and I'm going to, actually it's quite a lot, but it will evaporate quickly, and I'm going to just wipe down each of the contact points in each row, one at a time, just to make sure that we've gotten off any surface contaminants, any oxidation. You do not want to do this on the membrane itself. You can wipe that carbon layer right off, and in doing so, you'll ensure that it'll never work again. So no solvents of any kind, just light pressure with a dry cotton bud if you're going to try and repair the membrane itself. And as I'm doing this, I can see that some of that surface contamination is actually coming right off. I have to apply some pretty good amount of pressure to make it disappear, and I'm afraid it's going to be really difficult for you to see. I don't have a macro lens or anything like that, but let me see if I can't get a better close-up for you anyway. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there is some contamination there. I'm going to try and remove it. Yeah, can you see that? Now it looks better. Yeah, that's looking a lot better. Okay, great. Now I have to try and remove this tape that's holding these contacts in place. These should not have adhered to the board. They should have come off with the membrane. Just gonna peel them off. Oh yeah, it's deteriorating just as I remove it. Parts are just falling off. Yeah, that's really bad. There's a lot of corrosion there, a lot of contamination, and the contacts, the actual contacts themselves, a lot of them have broken apart and just kind of flaked off. That's why we're getting that sporadic contact with the board. Never mind the fact that the clamp that holds this in place was missing entirely or wasn't screwed in, but the contacts themselves have just worn out to the point where they're not working anymore properly. You can repair these with some of that graphite conductive paint if you want to try doing that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and remove all of this residue here with a little more IPA and see if I can't clean up those gold contacts. The PCB should be fine, but the membrane itself is pretty much shot at this point. Just trying to remove anything that's stuck on here. Yeah, look at that. That's all the carbon from the membrane that had stuck onto these gold contacts. We need to get all of that off in order for this to work again. Since it is so bad, I'm going to try using one of these pencil erasers. These are usually good for cleaning gold contacts, you know, Nintendo cartridges, things like that, where there's a lot of contamination. And it seems like it's starting to come up. It is really bad though. Oh, we're making good progress though. It's already starting to look better, but there's still a lot of contamination on there, so I'm gonna have to give it another pass with the eraser. Oh yeah, even better. All right, I'm gonna keep going and we'll come back to this when it's done. And there we go, looking pretty good. You can see the contacts are fully restored back to their original glory. I can't believe it worked at all, to be honest. The original membrane is pretty shot. It's going to be really difficult to try and repair that with the piece having peeled right off of it. And I'm not going to try and restore this because they make new ones now. What we've got here is a brand new keyboard membrane that were produced in 2019. Up till that point, it was impossible to replace the membrane on your SX-64 and you had to repair the one that you had. But now it's possible to replace the entire thing with a brand new membrane. According to the website, it should be built using the latest techniques and should outlast the original. So I am going to replace the original membrane with this new one and just toss this because it is worn out. And hopefully this one will both be constructed better and last longer than trying to repair this original one. Well, it may be possible to repair. They may fail again in the future. So what I'm going to do is just replace it outright. And there are a few design differences here. Very similar in design to the original, but they've reinforced the contact point here. They've added a little felt that'll help secure it to the PCB a little bit better. Other than that, it appears to be pretty much the same construction. We have both the ground plane here. We've got the contact points. These ones, of course, looking shiny and brand new and not detached from the board at all. Instead of carbon, it looks like we've got some sort of metallic surface instead of a carbon contact. So maybe these won't wear out and degrade over time as quickly as the carbon contacts on the original PCB, or I'm sorry, the original membrane. You can also see on the original membrane where the springs strike the membrane, there's all these little divots. If I hold it up just right, you can see all the little divots. So these things actually do wear out over time. There's mechanical pressure as the spring pushes on them, and they can deform over time, they can just wear out. So on the whole, I'm glad to have a brand new one. This should, in theory, last the lifetime of the machine at this point. Now, we really do live in a great time for the retro hobby. The fact that they're making such bespoke products for such limited run machines these days that you can actually get the parts to repair them is pretty amazing if you think about it. So I'm going to link to the manufacturer's website that sells these in the description so you can get one for yourself if you need one for your SX-64. And even if you don't need one, I kind of recommend that you pick one up while they are available because someday you might. The spacebar was so yellow that it took a fair amount of retrobrighting to bring it back. Only day 2 was sunny, so days 1 and 3 I did inside in the garage. But I think it's ready to go now, so let's see how it came out. Remember when I said the previous owner didn't install the spacebar correctly? Well, as it turns out, that's because they broke this little clip that holds the stabilizer bar in place, and the plastic piece wasn't anywhere to be found, so I couldn't glue it back together even if I wanted to. Now, I looked high and low for a replacement, but I couldn't find anything online. I did find this model for a Cherry MX keycap, and with my limited CAD knowledge, I did manage to turn it into this. I went through 9 iterations of this model to try and get the ideal fitment and durability. This is really my first time printing something this small, so it took a lot of testing to get the proper support and bed placement and part strength so they wouldn't break apart. As a result, there were a number of false starts, but in the end, I did get something that I think will do the job. Now, it's not identical to the original part, but I think it should do the job. I will upload this remix to Thingiverse if it does work, and if not, I'll continue to tweak the design until I get it right. Before we can reassemble and test, we need to find a suitable replacement for this missing screw. I measured it up, and for future reference, it's an M2 by 5mm machine screw. It's a little bit smaller than your standard PC screw, and a little bit larger than something that you'd use for eyeglass repair. I didn't have one on hand, so I reached out to some friends, and they were able to hook me up, so thank you both to Tom and Sati for getting the screw to me in such short notice. As you can see, it's a perfect fit. All right, let's get this thing put back together. When I was about to reassemble, I noticed one more difference between the new and the old membrane. This one has an integral rubber sheet that separates the contacts from the PCB. This one does not, so the contacts sit flush with the surface. What you need is this other part that came in the package, and it's a very thin, hopefully you can see that, clear plastic sheet that goes on the PCB first and aligns with the membrane such that it offsets the contact points from the PCB. So we're going to need to put this down first. So it's very important that we get the alignment just right. Fortunately, the LED kind of acts as a guide hole, and there are a few other places where the membrane can't move too much. We just need to make sure that this standoff, this plastic separator sheet, is aligned pretty much perfectly centered on each of the contact points, and then we can put down the membrane right on top of it. We need to make sure that this is aligned properly so that each of the fingers on this interface are properly lined up with each of the fingers on this part here. And you can see that they're kind of covered a little bit, so we're going to have to make sure that it's exactly right when we lay them down. Everything looks pretty good and centered on both the left and the right side of the board. So I think nothing to it but to test. And for that, what I want to do is I'm going to try 2 different keys, one on one row and column and another on a different row and column, just so that I can verify that the interface between the board and the membrane is working. And furthermore, I'll test keys that didn't previously work. So it looks like the W up here will be a good choice, and the Q down here will be a good choice. And that'll ensure that we have good contact on both sides of this interface here. And the new membrane doesn't align perfectly with the screw holes here, so there's a little bit of an offset when you get to this side of the board. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem, but what we'll do is we'll install the keys and we'll find out. It's funny that the Q and the W are right next to each other on the keyboard, but they're so far apart in terms of the matrix. They're on opposite ends of the traces that come to the board. So these two keys alone should be a good indicator if we've got this connection correct. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Well, that works, and it's nice and stable now, but I think it's binding up a little bit on the post that I just printed. I may need to file it down a little bit, shave off a little off the end so it's not as tight. All right, so I filed down the post a little bit. The tolerances on that thing are really, really tight, so I'm gonna have to go back and revise the 3D model a bit. Basically, it binds up a little bit when you press down on it, just so. It is nice and firm though, the spacebar is really nice and tight, but once in a while it will bind up, so I need to go back and revise the model. So I'm gonna do that. But for now, let's press on. I am really pleased with how that spacebar came out after 3 days of retrobrighting. It matches the other keys really well now. Before it was awful. But yeah, looking really sharp, so there's only one thing left to do now.
And there was much rejoicing.
So there we have it, a fully functional Commodore SX-64 keyboard. Every key has been tested and is working, and I'm super happy with how it came out. It looks fantastic and it works perfectly. Well, except for the spacebar. I do need to go back and tweak the 3D model for the stabilizer post and print it in something a little sturdier than PLA. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments if you like this unscripted, less formal style. I can do videos like this from time to time if people are interested. And if you're new here, please do consider subscribing and check out our backlog of content. There's lots of interesting stuff there. I hope you enjoyed this bit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.